Hi, my name is Matt Fritchley, and this is my story. My mixed-race family arrived in Canada in 1959, finding their way to Hamilton, Ontario, where I was to be the only Canadian-born member of my clan. My East Indian father never let me forget that in this land of promise, if I worked hard, did my civic duties, there would be nothing I couldn't accomplish. He led by example, overcoming whatever racial biases he may have faced, and provided our family with a comfortable middle-class lifestyle. I took those lessons to heart. I excelled in school, sport, and the arts, ultimately earning 2 degrees in English and theater. The theater degree with a strong emphasis on practicing the arts within a social justice framework. At 31, I created my own theater company where I wrote and performed drama therapy workshops for at-risk youth and young offenders, serving facilities stretching from Niagara to Brantford. At 40, my brand of drama therapy was finely tuned, unique, and effective. I was, it seems, living the Canadian dream. My wife and I were expecting our first child, we owned a nice home, and I loved my work. Then, my wife became seriously ill after a complicated birth with our beautiful girl who lives with a severe genetic disability. Unable to sustain the pace of my career and the level of caregiving my family required in the home, around the clock, in 2006 I took a sabbatical, expecting to return to work within a year or two. That turned into a 19-year odyssey. Despite moving my family to the fresh air and open spaces of Huron County, my wife never returned to health. By 2016, savings, investments, and finally the family home slipped away. I began to use opioids just to be able to keep up with the demands of my role as a caregiver, to artificially offset my chronic exhaustion, depression, and constant anxiety in advance of the next major life crisis, which seemed to be weekly, if not daily occurrences. Real-time existential dread, all the time. Can I parenthesize, where was the Canada my father promised me? On the eve of COVID, my wife passed away, and 4 years later, my daughter, now 20, was offered a too-good-to-pass-up place in a lovely group home run by Community Living. And it is truly lovely, and they treat her beautifully. But the artist was gone. The force of nature was gone. The caregiver had nothing left to give. I had lost myself, resulting in a complete emotional and mental collapse. I stopped caring about anything, so overwhelmed with grief, guilt, and fear. Fear of waking up to face another day, each day. Bills went unpaid, and inevitably, I was evicted. I'm not certain I knew the gravity of the situation I was in, but there was always one sure way out. I spent several months camping and living in my car. Part of me fancied myself on some sort of Jack Kerouac-esque adventure. When there was no more money and I ran out of road, I decided to join my wife, but failed twice. I ended up at the psychiatric ward of the Alexandria Marine Hospital in Goderich. My intent, upon release from the hospital, was to do a better job of it and relieve myself of this mortal coil. I was, however, taken to the transition house in Clinton, where I would have a bed, counseling, and support, finding a more permanent place to stay. Then came the CMHA Goderich and the Mobile Mental Health Unit, an excellent new resource. They all played a part to varying degrees in saving my life, quite literally. I also have to acknowledge the inherent goodness of my fellow homeless. People who will reach out to anyone in crisis even though they have so little themselves. For the most part, there is such a tender humanity under the tough exteriors of those failed and forgotten, those who have suffered trauma and abuse, mental illness and substance abuse beyond mortal endurance, it would seem. Indeed, drugs don't solve anything, but they quiet the voices, numb the pain, make you forget the condition you're living in, or at least easier to cope with. But nobody is irretrievable. That is what the community at large needs to understand. I go to the CMHA office in Goderich most weekdays in recovery groups, therapy groups, peer support groups, and I am blessed to have found some of the most creative, intelligent, personable, and sensitive people I have ever met. I am honored to call them friends, roommates, comrades. As a person who has absorbed the shock of great trauma, lived crisis to crisis for decades, and borne the mantle of mental illness, addiction, and homelessness, and is now scarred with the stigma attached to those conditions, I see that without trial, without hearing, I am judged and socially exiled like those friends I just described. We remain probably the single most oppressed demographic in society, even though we cross all gender, preference, ethnicity, race, class, and culture lines. Nobody is immune. These problems are not going away. We can face them head on with meaningful discussion, greater funding for treatment, housing, and sustained recovery, so we can get back to, or have the chance to, be productive, positively involved members of our community that we are all capable of being. All we require is acceptance, tolerance even, to move comfortably through space and heal without feeling shunned, unwanted, invisible. Whenever I was asked about the community advocacy and meaningful work I did in my career, I'd always dig up that hackneyed old phrase, "But for the grace of God, there go I." Well, here I am. Let's talk.